Sir, your mother isn't dead. I saw her alive in the asylum. The sentence hit the room harder than any thunder outside. The grand piano was still vibrating from the last note when Damani, the new housekeeper. A black woman with trembling hands and eyes flooded with panic froze beside the portrait above the keys, clutching her cleaning cloth like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The man at the piano, Julian Beaumont, lifted his head slowly. His face carried the tired grief of someone who had buried a part of himself years ago. "That's impossible," he said, voice low, controlled, dangerously controlled. "My mother died 6 years ago." I stood at her wake. Damani shook her head, swallowing a sob. "No, sir. I swear on my family. She is alive, breathing, suffering." Her words came out fast, urgent, like truth was burning her from the inside. "I worked at St. Michael's Angel Clinic. I cleaned the halls where people are locked away so the world can forget they exist. And she was there at the end of the corridor, always by the window, waiting for you." Julian's stomach turned. The clinic name was too familiar, too connected to the version of the story he'd been forced to accept. Damani stepped closer, her voice breaking. "She prayed your name every night. She said her son played the piano like angels. And she wore the same gold necklace like the one in that portrait." Julian's eyes snapped to the painting. The necklace gleamed in oil and memory. And in that moment, the life he thought was settled, his mourning, his marriage to Celeste, his carefully sealed past began to crack, one impossible truth at a time. Julian didn't answer her right away. The room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. His hands slid off the piano keys, fingers suddenly useless, and his chest tightened with a familiar ache, the one he'd lived with for 6 long years. Grief had become a routine for him, a controlled thing. Something he managed with work, silence, and late nights alone with music he never finished. "My mother is gone," he said finally, more to himself than to Damani. I watched them lower the casket. I signed the papers. I learned how to live without her. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt rehearsed, hollow. Because memory is cruel like that. It waits. Julian saw his mother Evelyn Beaumont, the way she used to stand behind him when he played as a boy, correcting nothing, just listening. He remembered the smell of her perfume in the mornings, the way she hummed while arranging flowers, the way the house had gone silent after she was taken for treatment. He remembered never seeing her body, remembered being told it was better that way. The guilt he'd buried deep began to breathe again. "I failed her," he whispered, his voice cracking despite years of practiced restraint. "I trusted people I shouldn't have. I let them decide what was best because I was tired, because I was weak." Damani didn't interrupt. She stood there grounding the moment simply by staying. When she spoke again, her tone softened. Not accusing, just honest. "She never blamed you," she said quietly. "Even when she cried, even when she was afraid, she believed you'd come, every single day." Julian closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, tears escaped, slow, heavy, uncontrollable. Behind him, the door creaked open, and the presence of Celeste Beaumont filled the room like cold air. Her perfume felt intrusive now, her silence sharp. Julian sensed it before he saw it. Something sacred had been disturbed. And somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the fear, a dangerous thought took root. What if his mother had never left him at all? What if she had been waiting? Julian turned back to Damani slowly, as if one wrong movement might shatter whatever fragile truth had begun to surface. "You said you touched her," he murmured. "Spoke to her." His voice was raw now, stripped of authority. "Then tell me something. One thing only my mother could know." The room held its breath. Damani wiped her palms against her uniform, eyes glistening. "She sang to herself at night," she said softly. Not loud. Almost like she was afraid the walls would steal it. She swallowed. It was about a silver boat. sailing through the clouds. And the captain was her little boy searching the stars just to bring one back for her. The world tilted. Julian's knees buckled, and he caught himself against the piano, fingers digging into polished wood. That lullaby had never been written down, never shared. His mother had invented it for him when he was a frightened child who couldn't sleep without the light on. Even Celeste had never heard it. A sound escaped Julian's chest, half sob, half breath he'd been holding for years. "That song died with her," he whispered. No, Damani replied gently. It lived, in a small room, behind locked doors. Behind them, Celeste stepped forward, her heels sharp against the floor. "Enough," she said, her voice honeyed, but tight. "This woman is manipulating you. Anyone could invent a story if they listen long enough." Julian didn't look at her. He was staring at the portrait, at the painted gold necklace resting against his mother's chest. The same necklace Damani had mentioned, the one that had supposedly been lost during transfer. "Why didn't I see her body?" he asked quietly. Not to Damani, not even to Celeste, to the silence itself. Celeste's hand found his arm gripping too tightly. "Because it would have destroyed you." He pulled away. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of the answers. For the first time, doubt outweighed denial. And deep inside, beneath the grief and the shock, one terrible certainty settled in Julian's bones. If Damani was telling the truth, then someone had stolen years from his mother's life. And someone in this house knew exactly who. Celeste's composure cracked, not loudly, not all at once, but just enough for Julian to notice. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that didn't belong in the room. "This is absurd," she said, tightening her grip on his sleeve as if anchoring him back to the version of reality she preferred. "You're really going to let a housekeeper poison your mind with fantasies about your mother?" Damani didn't step back. She stood still, spine straight, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm not asking him to believe me," she said quietly. "I'm asking him to remember." Celeste's eyes flickered just for a second. Panic, then calculation. "She wants money," Celeste snapped, turning to Julian with practiced urgency. "Attention, sympathy, people like her always do." Her words landed hard, cruelly chosen. "You're grieving. That makes you vulnerable." Julian looked at her then. Really looked. At the tension behind her smile. At the way her fingers dug into his arm as if control were slipping through them. At how quickly she'd moved to silence Damani instead of asking questions. "What if she's right?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Celeste stiffened. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Don't dishonor your mother by turning her death into a spectacle." The irony struck him like a blow. "My mother," Julian said, slowly, used to say, "truth doesn't need protection. Only lies do." He gently removed Celeste's hand from his arm. The distance between them felt wider than the room. Damani exhaled shakily. "She told me you'd doubt," she said. "She said your heart would fight your mind. But she also said when you finally listened, you'd be unstoppable." Celeste stepped back, color draining from her face. "Enough," she hissed. "Julian, send her away. Fire her. End this before it destroys us." But something had already broken. Julian felt it settle deep inside him, a quiet, irreversible shift. He wasn't choosing Damani over Celeste. He was choosing doubt over blind loyalty, truth over comfort. And as Celeste's mask slipped further, Julian understood with chilling clarity. If his mother had been betrayed, the betrayal hadn't come from strangers. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It bled through memory. Julian stepped away from the piano and walked toward the study. His movements slow, deliberate, as if his body already knew what his mind was still resisting. He opened drawers he hadn't touched in years. Old documents, medical reports, transfer forms signed on days he barely remembered living through. And suddenly patterns appeared. The diagnosis that had escalated too quickly. The doctor, Dr. Victor Lobo, who spoke in polished certainty, but never allowed second opinions. The way Evelyn had tried to speak alone with him, only to be interrupted by Celeste's gentle urgency. The way fear had been wrapped in the language of care. Julian's breath grew shallow. Damani's voice echoed in his mind. She was sane. Afraid, but sane. He remembered the night everything ended, the staged chaos. The accusation, the doctor arriving too fast, the ambulance waiting as if summoned in advance. His mother's eyes had locked onto his not wild, not confused, just betrayed. "Don't let them take me, I'm not sick," he had failed her. In the living room, Celeste stood rigid, watching him flip through papers with growing panic. "You're spiraling," she said sharply. "This is grief distorting your memory." "No," Julian replied quietly. "This is memory finally waking up." He held up a report. Dates altered. Signatures duplicated. Payments routed through shell accounts labeled medical care. His hands trembled not from fear but from rage. "You orchestrated this," he said, his voice breaking into something cold and lethal. "You didn't just remove my mother from this house. You erased her." Celeste's silence was the loudest sound in the room. Damani lowered her gaze, tears sliding down her face. They kept her quiet with medication. When that didn't work, they hid her. Julian closed his eyes. His mother hadn't died 6 years ago. She had been buried alive by lies, greed, and his own blindness. And in that moment, Julian understood something terrifying and undeniable. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about survival. And redemption was no longer optional. Evelyn's world did not end the night she was taken away. It narrowed. White walls. Locked doors. The constant hum of fluorescent lights that never fully turned off. At St. Michael's Angel Clinic, time wasn't measured in days, but in doses sedatives that dulled the body restraints that punished resistance, silence enforced as treatment. Evelyn learned quickly that screaming only earned her more medication, so she became quiet. They took her jewelry first. Her ring, her necklace, anything that reminded her of who she had been. They dressed her in gray and called her unstable, though her eyes were clear and her voice steady whenever the drugs loosened their grip. Every night she sat by the narrow window of her room, fingers pressed against cold glass, whispering her son's name, like a prayer. Julian, over and over, as if repeating it might carry her voice beyond those walls. "They told me you forgot her," Damani said softly, standing beside Julian now. "They told her you didn't come because you didn't want to." Julian's chest shattered. She never believed it. Damani continued, tears slipping free. Even when they isolated her, even when they said she was dead to the world. She said a mother knows when her child still loves her. Evelyn endured the worst, not because she was strong, but because love gave her no other choice. She learned to hide pills under her tongue, to smile at doctors, to survive by pretending to break. And when hope was almost gone, she wrote messages on scraps of paper, prayed with invisible beads, and waited. She waited for truth to find a crack. Julian felt physically ill, imagining her there alone, aging, stripped of dignity, while he mourned a lie. "They buried her alive," he whispered. "And I let it happen." Damani shook her head gently. "You didn't know. But now you do." Julian straightened, and in that moment the grief transformed into fury, into purpose, into a vow he would not break again. If his mother was still breathing anywhere in this world, he would find her, and he would bring her home. Damani had carried the truth like a hidden wound for years. After leaving the clinic, she hadn't slept peacefully again. Every night, Evelyn's voice followed her, calm, dignified, unbroken. "If anything happens to me, find my son." Damani had promised, knowing promises like that could cost a life. Now, standing in Julian's house, she felt the weight finally shift. "I stayed silent longer than I should have," Damani admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared. They were powerful. People like me disappear when we speak too loudly." She lifted her chin, eyes shining with resolve. "But some truths rot the soul if you keep them buried." Julian listened without interrupting. The man who once hid behind denial was gone. In his place stood someone sharper, awake. "You didn't betray her," he said to Damani. "You protected her when no one else did." She shook her head. "I just stayed human." That was when Julian understood this wasn't about courage in one dramatic moment. It was about endurance, about choosing conscience over comfort again and again, even when no one applauds. He walked to the window and stared out at the darkened grounds. Somewhere out there, his mother was breathing without him, aging without him, waiting. "I wasted 6 years mourning a lie," he said quietly. "I won't waste another minute." He turned back to Damani, his decision already made. "You're not alone in this anymore." For the first time since she'd spoken, Damani let herself cry, not from fear, but relief. Julian felt something solid form in his chest. Not hope, not yet. Resolve. He would follow every thread, expose every lie, tear down every wall built to silence his mother. Even if it meant destroying his marriage, even if it meant burning his old life to the ground, because a son's duty does not end at the grave. And redemption only begins when truth is faced head-on. Somewhere deep inside, Julian felt it clearly now. This was not the end of the story. It was the moment the truth began to fight back. Julian didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his study as dawn slowly erased the darkness surrounded by old photographs, legal files, and the ghost of every choice he had made while trusting the wrong people. With each passing hour, the fog that had ruled his life for years lifted, replaced by something far more dangerous than grief clarity. Everything made sense now. The rushed paperwork, the closed casket, the doctor who discouraged visits, Celeste's constant insistence that moving on was the only healthy option. It hadn't been care. It had been control. Julian pressed his palms against the desk, breathing deeply as the truth settled into his bones. The man who had once been passive, exhausted, and obedient to comfort was gone. In his place stood someone sharper, someone awake. "They thought I'd stay broken," he said quietly to Damani, who stood nearby watching him with cautious hope. "They counted on my guilt, on my silence." He lifted his eyes, and there was no hesitation left in them. They were wrong. For the first time since Evelyn had been taken, Julian allowed himself to feel anger, not wild, not reckless, but focused, calculated, the kind of anger that builds plans instead of excuses. "We start by gathering proof," he continued. "Bank transfers, medical records, names. I don't want rumors. I want facts so solid they collapse lies on contact." Damani nodded, understanding the gravity of what had just begun. "They won't stop easily," she warned. "People like that never do." Julian gave a cold, steady smile. "Neither will I." In that moment, something irreversible happened. Julian was no longer a man haunted by doubt. He was a son reclaiming his duty, whatever it cost, whatever it exposed. Because somewhere out there, his mother was still alive, still waiting. And no marriage, no fortune, no carefully constructed lie would stand between him and the truth again. The silence of the house no longer felt heavy. It felt like the calm before justice finally arrived. The road to Street Lucia disappeared into fog and mud, as if the world itself were trying to hide what waited at the end of it. Julian barely felt the steering wheel beneath his hands. Every mile was powered by something deeper than fear, by a son's refusal to arrive too late again. Damani sat beside him in silence, fingers clasped tight, whispering prayers she didn't realize were allowed. Dawn broke, slowly pale and unforgiving, revealing the outline of a decaying building swallowed by trees and neglect. "This is it," she said. The place looked less like a clinic and more like a grave that hadn't finished closing. Julian ran inside before the engine had fully stopped. Doors slammed open. Voices shouted. Confusion erupted. Behind every locked room were faces that carried the same hollow resignation he had imagined on his mother's for years. Elderly men and women, forgotten, discarded. Then he heard it, a soft voice, fragile, familiar. "Julian." Time shattered. He found her by the window, wrapped in worn blankets thinner than memory hair, white as winter. But her eyes were still hers, still fierce, still alive, still. Julian dropped to his knees, unable to breathe. "Mom," he sobbed, pressing his forehead into her hands. "I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm taking you home." Evelyn touched his face as if afraid he might vanish. "I knew you would come," she whispered. "A mother always knows." Damani stepped forward, tears streaming freely now. Evelyn reached for her too. "You kept your promise," she said softly. In that broken room, something sacred happened. Years of betrayal collapsed under the weight of truth. The lies lost their power the moment love found its way back. As they carried Evelyn into the morning light, Julian felt the past loosen its grip for the first time. Justice would come later. Consequences would follow. But in that moment, only one thing mattered. His mother was alive, and she was finally going home. The house felt different the moment Evelyn crossed its threshold. Light moved through the rooms again, not because the curtains were open, but because truth had finally returned home. Julian walked beside his mother, slowly matching her fragile steps, afraid that if he moved too fast, the moment might break. She touched the walls, the piano, the window frames, silent witnesses to years stolen from her life. "I thought I'd never see this again," Evelyn whispered. Julian swallowed hard. "You're home now. No one will ever take that from you again." Justice followed swiftly, though healing moved at its own pace. Authorities uncovered everything. False diagnoses, forged documents, money trails soaked in greed. Celeste vanished before the arrest came, leaving behind empty closets and a marriage that collapsed under the weight of truth. Dr. Victor Lobo was not as lucky. His arrest made headlines, and with it came the exposure of dozens of other forgotten souls, hidden behind locked doors and lies. But Julian didn't stop at punishment. With Evelyn's blessing, he transformed his guilt into purpose. He founded the Evelyn Beaumont Foundation, dedicated to protecting the elderly from abuse, abandonment, and silence. Lawyers, doctors, advocates, people who could no longer look away, joined the cause. Lives were restored, families reunited, voices reclaimed. Damani never returned to cleaning floors. She became family. Evelyn held her hand, often squeezing it gently, a language only survivors understand. "You gave me back my son," she would say, "and you gave him back his soul." On quiet evenings, Julian played the piano again, not to escape, but to remember. Evelyn sat nearby, eyes closed, listening. The Silver Boat Lullaby drifted through the air, no longer a song of waiting, but of return. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with truth, because truth doesn't shout. It waits. And when it finally speaks, it brings the lost back home. In the quiet that followed justice, something deeper settled into the Beaumont home understanding. Evelyn often sat by the window in the late afternoons, sunlight warming her fragile hands, watching Julian play with the old piano keys as if relearning the language of himself. Damani would stand nearby, never needing to speak. Presence had become enough. The pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled them. It had been transformed into wisdom, into vigilance, into purpose. Julian understood now what his mother had tried to teach him all along. Love isn't loud, and truth doesn't rush. It waits. Sometimes for years. Sometimes in locked rooms. Sometimes in the courage of someone the world overlooks. Evelyn had survived because she refused to forget who she was. Damani had saved her because she refused to look away. And Julian had been redeemed because he finally chose to listen. The world kept moving, but the lesson stayed. This story reminds us of a truth we often avoid. Evil doesn't always look cruel. It often looks respectable. And silence, when paired with comfort, can become a form of betrayal. If there's one thing to take with you today, let it be this. Listen to the quiet voices. Question the official stories. And never underestimate the power of one honest person who refuses to stay silent. Because truth may be delayed, but it is never defeated. If this story touched something in your heart, Tell us in the comments what part stayed with you the most. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know, your attention might be the voice that helps someone come home.